Okay, so on this installment of reading from the Parinama method, we're on page 195, and we're gonna read. This is all about communication and expression. So we're gonna read. I'm actually feeling really compelled to finish the themes. So as you can see in the thumbnail, we're doing 3 V's: positive and negative words and creative expression. I don't remember what positive and negative words are, what I wrote about this, so I'm kind of curious to see what, I don't know. For some reason, there's something in me that's like, "Is this still gonna align with me?" Because I've actually been really, in terms of, like, production and to the connection to where I'm at right now, I've been really, I guess, like, I don't know if it's, like, surprised, but just the sense of how this, because when I was writing it, it transformed a lot in the process, like, the notions that were in it, like, evolved a lot as, like, I was in a very particular process of kind of, like, landing the notions as it related to constructing the book. Longer topic, not gonna be discussed here, but that things that they would evolve and they would materially change. And now reading through it, I'm seeing that there's kind of an aspect of it where it's sort of like holding its space, and if anything, just kind of like more representing like a baseline that builds off of, like, it's like a baseline, and now I'm seeing kind of like a larger kind of in scope application of it, but not a material shift where it's like, yeah, that actually, like, a couple times I've been like, "Yeah, that could be better." But most of those shifts had to do with how much I saw myself, in this kind of process of, like, kind of shedding the aspect of it of being, I don't know whether it's biographical or autobiographical, whichever, where I'm, like, talking about myself, where I see a lot of my own self, like, very reflected in it, which is inevitable, I realize. But anyway, so it's like the chat, the production chat, I guess, is like that's what came up with that. So yeah, so we're in the fifth hub talking about expression and communication. If we were having a conversation, and if, anything that you care to put in the comments, or if you want to send it privately to me, on the Instagram, the Parinama Method Instagram, um, private message, do that. And for folks who know me, continue as you are, as you are. Um, but this, I'm really like, I'm curious about what you're experiencing in this hub, in this exploration, as far as what is coming up, because that is tends to be part of this, is that it is evocative, and 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 specifically as it relates to speaking up. So I'm going to say, like, specifically as it relates to speaking up, as it relates to the boundaries around, protecting oneself from, like, what I'd call nefarious forces. As I've mentioned in previous readings, I'm actually going to probably go kind of long today on this one, so just, for whatever that's worth as a piece of information. But in the previous hubs, there hadn't been as kind of much of a, like, very directive addressing of the fact that there are, like, nefarious forces, people who for and like, people who wish to cause harm. And if only, and I won't even get into the hows and the whys with that, but because that's, once again, that's kind of a bit of a larger discussion about, like, what that is. But I think if you're kind of piecing this together, you can see that a lot of it has to do with being, like, pretty unconscious and, like, lacking self-awareness, and really expressing an inner divide like these conflicts that they're just like living out so much that they need to just be protected, expressed, and even shadows being like unrestricted. And so, in all of this, the responsibility, and we talk about this in the Parinama for Beginners class. I'm going to be doing another one probably starting in the middle of September, so in like about 2 weeks. We talk about the different, like reducing shame and replacing it with accountability and responsibility. So, like the idea of like an overwhelming sense of like your behaviors and your feelings and your thoughts making you a person that should is just like unworthy of humanity, or just like these like crippling like divides and lonelinesses and angers in ourselves. um the adaptations, really just adaptations, that there's that we have people acting out of those without responsibility. And one of the things is shame is such a acute like weapon, that it's like when we're weaponizing ourselves with it, we're like kind of protecting ourselves from it. So like the thing that shame does is it makes it really hard to address ourselves. It really makes it hard to accept ourselves. It makes it as a result, it makes us hard for us to see ourselves. So there's that whole thing. But so for, as mentioned in the last reading, a lot of this hub is addresses protections. It's not just about speaking and being heard, and listening and hearing. It's about why we don't fully express those things. Like it's why, so it's like on one level there's a discussion of, it's like talking and listening, and am I a bad talker, am I a good listener, like that thing. And that's where you can really stay in this really divided world. But the thing where like that's very parinama is we're going and being like, well, why would you talk a lot? Like, like why would like, and also like it's curiosity. I mean, it's at the core of this is having curiosity. And especially when it comes to our relationship with ourselves, is like assumption of positive intent. So it's looking for the innocence and the authenticity within, like it's like behind, it's like what are behind the adaptations, behind the layers, behind the behaviors, behind the beliefs, behind the reflexes, formation. It's like finding that. And so part of why, for speaking, communicating, expressing ourselves, like the reason that we don't just freely do that in full integrity is part of what we're exploring here. And a lot of that has to do with how safe we are in our ability to do that. And then also even listening and hearing has that same quality, because it's taking on information. And the protections against hearing things that will cause us harm, especially especially when we haven't been able, and talk about like shame and adaptations before we're able to like very comfortably, or even like with a reasonable amount of consciousness, be able to like really understand and be compassionate about the thing that we're protecting that's been harmed. I mean, because this is like, okay, this one today, I'm going to be it's going to get a little esoteric, but like part of that, just warning, this is like, but part of the thing that we're doing in terms of like especially in the early hubs, is like, one of the things is like, is like really trying to like reconcile the distaste for weakness, so it's like when these things are like weak or underdeveloped or needy, that we're like that disgust for that, like, or that kind of like kind of like, oof, it's like as an adaptation, that like really like what we're doing in the earlier hubs is like we're building this capacity to really have this very specific quality in the relationship that we have with ourselves. And as a result of that, I mean, one of the things I will say is as a result of that, when these things get reconciled, there's nothing to punch. Like, when someone I mean, one of the things and this goes back to that kind of special installment, like, when someone can see things about yourself that you're not fully aware of and in possession of, they have something to hit, and, like, it hurts because you're like, "Whoa." And if you're in full ownership and purchase of these aspects of yourself, your so-called, like, weaknesses that literally become are only weaknesses when they're in blind spots. Because as soon as we're conscious of them, they actually become strength because we're operating ourselves with greater purchase and governance, like, it's like that. So, so even the thing is if somebody's insulting us, the part that gets to us is the part that we're not reconciled in about what they're bringing to us, because it's like the reconciliation, like, who are you to be a da 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 da, right? Like somebody like, why, how are you, who am I to write a book about this? Who am I to write this book? Who am I to be sitting here talking about this? Like, who am I? And if there's any part of me, and there is a little bit, I can feel it kind of like there's a little like neat that kind of like pops up in that. It's interesting, surprised me. I knew it was there, but it still just like surprised me. There's and actually no, I'm not going to elaborate on that. I'm going to stay on this thread. The who am I to do this is that if I don't have that reconciled, anyone can use it against me. And it's not a truth. Like, my inherent worth and like my value that I bring or whatever doesn't really matter. I mean, this is an integral expression of myself, so it's kind of like whatever, but the adaptation part of me about being like, who am I to speak up? Really good person to that I like to like view in this is Taylor Swift, is watching how she just sort of handles her kind of her authority with like absolutely zero apology. And I think that it's interesting because it's like I see this in younger women that are coming up, is this non-apologetic composure, which like honestly in a lot of cases I think is in itself an adaptation, because I don't think it's like the underneath it is fully there, but even just the behaving as if is like a long is significant progress. But just in even what I would say is like anyone that you see in your life, and this is like has to go even with folks who are oppressive, is looking at their lack of apology in their sense of who they are. And it's like, it's like you can kind of pick off all the trash in that and kind of look at that quality and go, that's interesting. And like, and even the thing I remember the first time I saw Taylor Swift announce her album Midnights at an award show. I must have seen it on a TikTok or something, because like, I don't really like yeah, like, that's probably where and it just was, like, just her absolute, like, third hub completely, like, straight through composure in announcing this, like, it was a really, like, special gift to the world, um, and just and I remember being, like, kind of put off by it a little bit, and realizing, like, what that is now is that was something that's, like, that it's like, "Well, who are you to, dot, dot, dot," and then it's like, "Well, I'm," you know, who why not? Why not? Who is anyone? So anyway, so that was, like, a little bit of a kinda, whatever. So I'm gonna read a little bit, we'll see what comes up, and then, like, take it from there. So what do you say? All right, I'm just talking to myself right now. So yes, let's do that. Let's do that. Oh, by the way, also, here is the cup that was the original cup that I had ordered. That was where the Archangel Michael came mysteriously with it. So, yeah. It's really parinama. It actually hadn't occurred to me until right now. These really are, like, hub-related asanas or postures or whatever, for each of these people, but anyway, so I won't, um yeah, my like, lip stuff is on there. See, look, she's, like, doing a little balance, and this is, like, a little hip opening. It's kind of a power posture. This is opening here. Here you go with it. This may be a little bit less, but it's, like, visually interesting. And then do when we got to the 7th. Okay, let's go. I'm gonna read. So, the 3 V's. All right, I'm a little sweaty. I don't know why. I turned the air conditioning, like, up a little bit. Maybe that's it. A little more humid in here, or up, the temperature up, air conditioning down. All right, so body language. Okay, wait, just take a beat here. So the 3 V's in page 195. So the body language researcher Albert Mehrabian. Body language researcher Albert Mehrabian. That's not the first time I've said that name too, which is, like, honestly, I was about to say I think it's not. Finds that only a small percent of the total effect of a message is in the words. His research reveals that the big 3 for the effective communication are verbal, what we say for 7%. Wow. Vocal, how we sound, for 38%, and visual, body language, and other visual cues for 55%. So, thus, the words we use to communicate are framed by sound and physical expression. So, the more we can consciously reclaim our voice and body language, the more effective we are as communicators. That's really it's there's a lot of yeah, I'm actually gonna pin that and come back to it. So I'm a staunch because I might just say exactly what I was gonna say. So I'm a staunch believer in the idea that the best way to boost the effectiveness of your communication is to become increasingly comfortable with who you are, no matter what that looks like. Quiet, loud, silly, serious, it doesn't matter. Authenticity has a compelling quality felt by everyone who encounters it. That's I'm gonna read this, I'm gonna actually go back over it. I'm gonna keep rolling. So I discussed how adaptations can shape the tone, modulation, and volume of a voice later in this chapter. A shrinking voice adapts so it can sound small, quiet, and unthreatening. Lilting the end of sentences, so-called upspeak, is also a shrinking adaptation to diminish any threatening interpretation of statements by making them sound like questions. The inflating and overcompensating adaptation is interrupting, overbearing, and loud. Balancing expression in this hub is a resonant voice with a range that can either be loud or quiet as the situation calls for it. So, as with any adaptation, we're not trying to change ourselves. Instead, we're restoring dynamism to the hub to have access to more expression within it. A vocal adaptation is noticeable because the effects and constrictions don't adjust to the situation they're in. So, a vocal adaptation is noticeable because the affects and constrictions don't adjust to the situation they're in, but instead tend to amplify when under stress. So, when uncomfortable, a shrinking adaptation becomes quieter. and an inflating adaptation becomes louder. There's a lot in this. Okay, let's unpack it. So one of the things that came up when I was reading that first and foremost was how much and how important it is to make note of not feeling shamed by an adaptation in this hub. Very important. I'm like feeling that from like my core, the importance of bringing this up, because what we're talking about in the beginning of this chapter, we talked about how kind of high voltage shaming and like maybe panic about speaking up creates the fear, like or saying is very likely created the fear of public speaking. And so piling more shame on that's like, "Oh, and by the way, you're also talking wrong," it's like, "Oh, yeah, this thing that you're doing." Like, anything about your verbal I'm gonna talk about verbal communication, just talking, like what I'm doing right now, is anything that's like, "I'm doing this wrong," um, is just compounding the issue, and anything that we're trying to shift because we're like, "Oh, I'm doing this." The important thing here is that we're living from the inside out, and that what we're trying to find, we're not changing it. We're not going, "Oh my god, like, like, there can be some of that, but I think the thing is, like, the more stuff we're trying to change to be, like, better and, like, whatever, it's like we really like that reflex to just try to be like better versus really feeling the sense of like a rising integrity in our communication and reclaiming that. Really important. So if you're an overtalker, if you're a lilter, if you're an overbearer, it's like, predominantly that it's like that you can just be in a place of like first just see it without like any kind of notion around this needs to be better or this is hard or this is whatever. Like it arose for a reason. Certainly socialization for women, like the upward lilting and being less threatening, has really deep like and wide reasons that arises. Um, and then also to feel forceful and dominating and to interrupt, like really, that also arises from having like feeling the need to actually be heard or feel like whatever. Actually, I'm not even going to say what that is. I'm going to say like explore that. And, for some people, it can be, like a third hub overcompensation thing where it's like thinking that like what I have to say is like more important than what other people have to say, which is then becomes like a balancing in general about understanding, like allowing in new information. And oddly enough, that tends to be, that as an aspect, what I would say is like as a third hub action is actually connected to these hubs that we're getting into, which is fifth, sixth, and seventh, which is like ideas about like, yeah, and being heard and not heard. So yeah, I really felt like I had to bring that up. Um, let's see. Okay, there's 2 parts in here, and this comes from my professional life. I will tell you straight up, and this is something that has, led to, a lot of conventional success is my understanding this, and actually as a anecdote, when I built my first team, I remember really dissecting because I wound up doing the job for a like relatively short period of time that I wound up like building an entire organization into. And part of my ability to like actually like do that job and figure out how to do it well is this kind of thing I have, which is to be really curious about stuff and understand how it works, and especially when it comes to interpersonal stuff. And one of the things I noticed was that in order to exert like almost an invisible command because I was dealing in like heavily male dominated um like environments, I guess I'd say, like in my interactions, like in doing business, also as a leader, like my leadership team and the people that I was actually like peers with were all men. All the people that I like, did business with were men. And so part of the thing was understanding how to like really operate the controls more effectively instead of just like writing a script and like like the idea would be to like write a script and read it. And so what I really became very conscious of were these other ways that I was impacting and affecting, and there was more to it than just this, but this was something I was able to like really canonize and teach as I like hired and developed people, is to really become aware that your tone and your cadence. And, so it's like if I were to say, like, I would really like you to consider that this is a really important thing for you to, uh, or like, here's the thing you need to consider. This is a really important thing versus like, finding like a center. And I talked about an exercise that I did that's like the meaning of the words literally kind of like melts away when we're like adding different tonality. So it's like becoming aware of the intended like delivery. So it's like you're picking words because you want people to understand what you have to say. So it's like, why not pick tone so people understand what you have to say? Why not choose like consciously the physicality and the expression of how we're communicating so we have better command. This is something where I think I can see like a version where of sort of events where you get people that would say like, well, that's manipulative, and it's like word choice is manipulative. Like what we're doing is we're just developing better command and control of our communication. And so that's what I have to say on that. Yeah, and it's funny thing. This was like now we're getting like like getting closer to like 2000, like 15 years ago, like for 16, like a while. And I remember that I had put together a training on this that exists still. Um, yeah. And I put together a training on it. And I remember I had a bunch of people that worked for me that had gone to Harvard. And I went to Keene State, by the way. I went to like a state school that's like kind of, yeah, it's like a very small unknown state school in the town I went to high school in. And I remember, this guy coming into my office and saying, "This was actually kind of very similar what you just taught to a class that I took at Harvard." And this was when I was still really reconciling this thing about like, well, who am I to be in this position? And that like had left a big impression on me. I thought, wow, God, I'm cool. Like, or not even that. It was just kind of like, wow, that's a validation. It wasn't even that I'm really smart. It was just a validation. So, there's another thing and this is on page 195 if you want to reflect back and read. Um, and this is like it's a very like glossed over but important statement. So I'm going to read it again. Authenticity has a compelling quality felt by everyone who encounters it. So one of the benefits of finding an integrity, a dynamism, and in a rising sense that isn't about protecting, that's literally about like, this is me arising, this is my communication style, that is me talking. I don't feel like I'm trying to like please or like get myself into position. And I get that what I just said is going to sound like it's a little bit in opposition of saying you're trying to like actually like control it. But at its core, that there's a natural, so maybe it is a little bit in so it's like another dynamic of this. But at its core, that there's a resonant voice that arises without efforting, that is like a true expression of like speaking from yourself, and that also like it feels a little bit good. There isn't like any muscular tightness, there isn't any like exhaustion from like just the work of like holding an adaptation, that there's really a naturally arising quality to it. And one of the things about this is that when we speak, when we communicate from this position, it naturally like creates a type of, what did I call it? Quality, a compelling quality that people can feel. Like, not everyone, but I would say in general, there's just a notion where people can sense that you're not hiding anything. So as a result of that, like what you're portraying, people will be more disclosing because they can sense that it's like in that integrity. I believe in that integrity, there's this sense that like there's just kind of maybe a sense that you're like, there's nothing like, I'm not trying to manipulate you openly. I'm not trying to make you think I'm something that I'm not, so you'll do what I want. Like, just that there's this sense of like, you're not gonna use this against me. Maybe, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe this is like, I think I'm trying to like make more meaning out of this than, or I'm trying to like kind of come up with a way to describe something that's probably a little, like a lot more ethereal than I'm actually capable of talking about, which is that there's just a quality and of like authenticity, and that it's just, it transcends anything that I actually know how to express. But I know from, I'm speaking from the experience of both myself and like coaching and developing people in this, that it's like there's just something that happens. And you'll see this in um with certain people, that there's like a magnetic quality to their like very like profound level of comfort with themselves, and also that their expression of themselves being really like having this quality. Okay, so that's it for that. I'm gonna stop, and I'm gonna, on that, where, yeah, 32 minutes. I'm gonna do positive and negative words. Let's see what this says. I don't remember writing this. Um, all right. So some developmental psychologists say that negative words are okay, here we go. I know where this is going. So, okay. So some developmental psychologists say that negative words are 5 times more impactful than positive ones, and that neutralizing any negative comment requires 5 positive ones. One cruel word requires a lot of repairs. Yeah. As adults, we seek out and respond, often without being aware of it, to the voices and tones like the ones we first heard in our early lives. And our biology conflates safety with familiarity. Without conscious reclamation, we'll migrate towards familiar sounding voices and tones, even when they are in fact not safe at all. We both internalize the early voices and seek them out. If we had critical parents, we would likely find critical people to be more credible than people who are kind to us. If we grow up with kind and encouraging voices, we would find harsh and critical words and tones especially overwhelming and difficult to tolerate. I'm going to keep reading because to me it feels like there's like 2 points in there that are like only slightly related. So maybe it comes together. Maybe it comes together here. So in the third hub, I discussed how internalized criticism can be directed inward or outward. See chapter 6. The inward directed critical voice tends to take inappropriate responsibility for others while holding unrealistic, unfair expectations for itself. I'm going to read that again. The inward directed critical voice tends to take inappropriate responsibility for others while holding unrealistic, unfair expectations for itself. So, conversely, the outward facing inner critic finds fault in everyone else and creates unrealistic standards that judge others as unworthy or not good enough. This forms a subconscious protection against connection, which can often result in the marriage destroying scorn and contempt of Gottman's work. See chapter 7. Scorn and contempt. Internalized. So when people with an inward facing critic speak, they tend to second guess what they say and be very careful about avoiding embarrassment. Folks with outward facing critics tend to be more outspoken, but are alienating because of their harsh delivery. So, through socialization, outward critics may learn to behave when consciously controlled, but eventually they will let slip a few cruel words that may shock or disturb the recipient. Consciously surfacing and ousting the critical inner voice changes our relationship within ourselves and the ones we have with other people. There is a lot in that section. Good Lord, there's a lot in there. God, this book is like it's really dense, it's funny because we're on page 195, and I remember one of the early readers who is a, kind of a star in the conventional world had said, this book, she's like, I feel like it's like taking one bite of a dessert that you're gonna have to digest for the weekend. And we're on page 195, and the hits keep on coming. This is not, oh my God. Yeah, it's kind of wild. I think the one thing I get as a reflection here, personally, is like how intense a person I am, which is like, as being this person, I don't experience it, but it's like reflecting back on me. I'm like, this is a very intense person to deal with. Oh my God. It's like, God, like that, just dropping that, just imagining that comes up like as it could, in a conversation. It's like, God, what do you do with that? Oh my God, as it would, like, if you know me, you know. If you know me, you know. God, sorry, that is just really wild. I could actually, like, read that about 5 more times, and it would still probably remain pretty potent. Um, because this last paragraph, and I would encourage you to go back on this if this, like, speaks to you, if this feels like something you wanna kind of, like, think about. Page 195 and the positive and negative words. I love that. I'm like, yeah, I thought this was just gonna be like, say nice things, but it's like, whoa. So, I mean, in summary, I would say that the point is that negative and cruel words are like, have a potency that requires like a 5x reparative. So like 5 times the kindness. And also, let's go back to, I think this was in the last chapter, where it's like there's nothing that's ever going to be said to you that is like that matters, that's said to you in a way that is unkind. Like, this is really, like, this is where this links in. That would have been a great quote to have in there. It's that would have been that actually might have been a better placement to have that here, because that actually, I forget what the context was in the last where that actually came up, but it was the Sherry Huber, the Zen meditation teacher, talks about like there's nothing of importance that's ever going to be said to you without compassion, or kindness. And one of the things is that, it's really, there's just like that, like there's like kind of a like layers that are sort of coming up right now. And one of them is like how ineffective it is to try to work with somebody and develop them by pointing out their flaws. And that one of the things that can be really limiting is the idea, if we're familiar with that, if we're familiar with criticism, that we think that's how you get the best out of us, is by telling us that we're a piece of shit. Um, and just isn't true. I mean, the thing is that you may be someone that, and this is something that I certainly was an adaptation of mine, which was really recognizing criticism and having a hard time with people who were kind to me. I had it's interesting because this is a time that I've been like that's been sort of evocative for no particular reason. Now I'm sort of connecting something. But I was in interviewing for I was interviewing for jobs at one point, and I had a couple companies that were really interested in me. And one of them was this guy who was like just super unremarkable, like highly unremarkable. And the 2 top contenders, and the other was this man who was like, "Oh my god." He's like, "I just, like I see," like, he really saw my brilliance. Like, he, like, really just was like, and his motivation to get me to come and work on his team was, I mean, it was so human. He was so kind. He was so driven. He was like very successful, and he was just absolutely identified me and clocked me and was like very aggressively pursuing me as a candidate coming from a place of seeing me as somebody that was like extraordinary, certainly for the type of role that we were discussing. And I went with the ding dong guy because it was more familiar to me to have somebody that didn't really recognize me as being fantastic. I came up with all sorts of rationalizations that had to do with the compensation, which was like they were like de minimis, like it was not real. Like there were a couple little things that you could, you know, try to rationalize, but it wasn't true. And so that's the thing about like the shaping of reality, like the idea that's like I used to have this thing where like, and it was actually kind of true, is if I had a boss or someone who was really kind to me, I wasn't activated enough to like get great performance. So I kind of, it actually did help me to have people who didn't believe in me, because the only thing I ever wanted to do was prove somebody wrong. So that was like very, like that got a lot of energy out of me. So it's not just like imaginary stuff. It was like it just like actually activated me, but in a way that was super unsustainable. Like it activated me and it got great performance, but it also drained me. Yeah, and my understanding of where, and so then that created a very distorted notion that I had about where my talent came from, is that I kind of now had this mistaken idea that my talent was coming, like needed to have this crucible of torture in order for it to arise, versus understanding that it was actually arising in spite of that, and that the activation was actually just like breaking through kind of my protections, and also I guess kind of my exhaustion. So I needed like fire and the fear for my life to activate me, um, versus just being able to like have the stuff naturally arise, which it, boy, does it. And it's better. It's better. The quality is like it's more expansive. It's like it had a very directive quality of being like marching and sort of like flamethrower. But this quality that of like kind of having that, and it's like this and arose from that, and that a lot of that has to do with becoming comfortable with people who believe in me and recognizing that as being home, versus somebody that's critical. So there's a lot in here. I'm not going to unpack it all. I think that that's for you to do if it calls to you. So I'm going to read the last section here, which is creative expression, and that's going to be a wrap on, oh boy, on themes, because that means we're going into interruptions and stressors. And we're going to talk a little bit about those before we wrap up for today. But creative expression. So, yeah, the interruptions in here are like, they're pretty evocative. Yeah. So have your journal ready, honestly. Have your journal ready and have some of your somatic practices, like really, like truly. Okay, so we communicate to be understood, to build bridges, and to unify. But ultimately, every human experience is unique and cannot be duplicated. This introduces the relationship between a creator and a recipient is simultaneously universal and uniquely one's own. So this introduces the relationship between a creator and a recipient as simultaneously universal and uniquely one's own. So yeah, I'm going to keep reading. So music, cinema, written and spoken language all transmit part of another human's lived experiences to our own. Someone else's self-expression will be seen, interpreted, and experienced through the lens of our own perception. The same words spoken to 20 different people will create 20 distinct experiences. So we use language when we attempt to describe an experience. Still, most of the description will remain in the interstices, a mystery that psychoanalyst Otto Rank described when he wrote, quote, "The artwork presents a unity, alike in its efforts and in its creation, and this implies a spiritual unity between the artist and recipient, although temporary and symbolic only." I'm going to read it again. So it's the artwork presents a unity, alike in its efforts and in its creation. And this implies a spiritual unity between the artist and recipient, although temporary and symbolic only. So, in our experiences with art and creative expression, we crave the paradox of a shared experience that is unifying while also being completely our own. And it is both. Rank continued by saying that artwork produces a satisfaction that suggests that it is more than a matter of passing identification of two individuals, that it is the potential restoration of a union with the cosmos which once existed and was then lost. My voice is getting kind of weird. So perhaps the goal is to be understood, but the result is that observers come to better understand themselves. Yeah, like the goal is to be understood, but the result is that observers come to better understand themselves. It's like that one has like kind of multitudes within it. So it's really deceptively simple that perhaps the goal is to be understood like in communication and create and like creative works, but the result is that the observers come to better understand themselves. And that by better understanding yourselves, you are like yoking unity in like a shared humanity. And I think one of the things with that is that there's this paradox here, which is, it's kind of like, where is that? Yeah, a shared experience that is unifying while being completely our own. There you get that too in art where people really want it to be theirs, like the personalness of the experience in like as a response to work to like art of any kind. Um Like there's kind of like I'd almost call it a dichotomy where you have this sense that something very special just happened for you that is yours, and then also the sense of wanting to feel less alone in sharing that. So they're conflicting feelings. And many people, and this is actually, by the way, this is dipping a toe in the water that we're going to get into more deeply in the next two hubs. So everything sort of, it's like this is a tease here into this like a greater, I guess, grander notion here. But this is something, and this is like a dynamic that is kind of an ongoing, never reconciled notion, or maybe does get reconciled. Just not to my knowledge that I've seen it happen or experienced it, but it's this quality of, so I have a friend and we're talking about so like I don't want to say too much, but like the passing of her husband, and she was talking about how this kind of thing of like whenever anything happens, like getting used to not having it to share with him and transitioning that into this is for me. This experience is for me to experience and feel and have as mine. And that those two qualities exist simultaneously, and they're kind of like a paradox to, like the Esther Perel statement of it's a paradox to be managed rather than something to be solved. So yeah. And I'll say that as we get into these upper hubs, this this even exists in the lower hubs, but as we're getting into these upper hubs, we're talking about, and this is probably like really relates to why these are underdeveloped in a lot of people, uh, is that we're talking about things that never have a resolution, that they're actually really more about consciousness and becoming conscious of these like aspects of our lived in aliveness and the lived experience. So yeah, another thing really popular. Really popular. Yeah, it's really terrible. Yeah, it's really bad. It's really bad. There's no solutions here. It's just expansion. Well, yeah, I mean there was never a solution. Anybody who's like this is a way, this is something that can be solved, it's like, selling easiness that doesn't exist. And by the time you realize it's not easy, they're gone. That's one. I mean, I think that's one of the things is that a lot of like human attention and like even like kind of being able to like track like relation to things is that it's like a lot of times it's kind of like these solutions are sort of like sold to us, and that kind of initial sense of like of it being solved and the relief, because it's like if we don't have the capacity to exist in nuance, it's so comforting, the idea that we wouldn't have to, in order to transcend and to evolve. So it's like being given that, it's like here's the truth, like this is how it is, like, and it's like whew, phew. I mean, it's really nice, like that idea. I would say it's really like no shade, like why not want that? um and by the time it sort of reveals itself, I mean, I think one of the things, oh, this is probably something I'm not supposed to say, but a lot of like how that plays out is how the authority figures of our youth present like belief frameworks, and by the time we deconstruct them and realize that we spent decades if not lifetimes living in them, they're dead. Yeah, there it is. Okay, maybe I should, oh, whatever. I should have said that. It's great. Okay, so anyway, thank you so much. This was a long one, but we're on to interruptions and stressors. Onward we go. I don't know. I think this chapter is a little bit short. No, it seems kind of long. Actually, I'm like, oh, it is like long. We've got a little bit to go here. Not a lot, but anyway. I appreciate you so much for watching this. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And yeah, that's it for now. If if the book, the parinamamethod.com has all the options for buying it. I'm not going to be pursuing having it in bookstores anymore. It's not really, it's a lot of work. And quite frankly, the margins on this book, just like total transparency, the margins are really low. So having to actually put bandwidth into managing relationships for people to carry stuff when, it's like it's just like like the economy of it doesn't really make sense. And this isn't a great bookstore book. It's not it's just it's a textbook in a sense, like, it really is like this the density and the intensity of it is like it's not I think, like, the books that you go at a to get at a bookstore are the books that you go get at a bookstore, and maybe someday, just not right now, you know? I had originally intended on making a shorter form Parinama method, and that was when I had a lot of momentum behind the writing process, and I'm kind of in a different channel right now. We'll see what happens because there's like a shift that's happening in me right now where some like momentum and energy is gathering for like the next stage of what I do here. Who knows what that's going to look like? Because that's been really transforming. Um, yeah, a lot to say on that I'm not going to say here, but anyhow, again, thank you, and I can't wait to see you next time. Bye.